Psychotherapist William Peters is with us today to talk about shared death experiences and his new book, At Heaven's Door, What Shared Journeys to the Afterlife Teach About Dying Well and Living Better. You're connected with the Heart of Hospice. I'm Jerry Finter, here with Helen Bauer.
Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, we're here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
Hi, this is Gabby Jimenez of the Hospice Heart. I'm excited to let you know about an upcoming series on the Heart of Hospice podcast. I'm partnering with Jerry and Helen at the Heart of Hospice to bring you a special 6-part series on grief. We'll be talking with industry experts Isabel Stencil and Lisa Paul of the Death Deck about common grief issues we're all dealing with. You'll hear information about when to seek professional help for your grief and how to navigate grief that seems to hang on for years. We're also going to discuss grieving for a loved one while you're a caregiver for someone else. There'll be tips for managing grief by journaling and how to comfort someone who is grieving. Isabel and Lisa will share insight into grief issues in children and young adults. Be sure to subscribe to the Heart of Hospice podcast so you don't miss this great series. And you can also connect with me at thehospiceheart.net. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
We're going to have one of the most unusual topics today, shared death experiences. So William Peters is a specialist when it comes to shared death experiences. Not only has he had his own personal shared death experiences, as well as a near-death experience, a couple of them actually, but he is doing research on shared death experiences. So this is going to be a very fascinating topic.
He is a licensed psychotherapist, the founder of the Shared Crossing Project. William developed a series of leading-edge programs that introduced audiences to a broad assortment of experientially based curricula and practices. He's got a new book coming out in January of 2022 at Heaven's Door, and he has really got some fascinating stories, and his research is groundbreaking and captivating, I have to say. As one of those people who has not had a shared death experience, although I have been at the bedside for numerous deaths, I haven't had one of those experiences. And to talk to William, just amazing work that he's doing.
Right. And such an incredible force and passion that he has for this type of work that he's doing. And finding more and more people who have had these experiences. And I think that this information gets out into the public more and more, there will be people who share more about these experiences. As he says in the interview, it will become more mainstream.
Absolutely. So here's our conversation with William Peters.
William, we are so glad to have you on the Heart of Hospice podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jerry and Helen.
So we're really interested in what you have to share with us and with our listeners about the shared death experiences. So this really is kind of a unique thing that I don't think I really heard much about until just recently. So I want you to tell us about your experience. Let's start with your experience at Zen Hospice and the event that made you interested in the shared death experiences.
Sure. So I was a hospice worker, hospice volunteer, actually, at the Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco. And I was working in, they had 2 locations at that time. And I was at the San Francisco Public Hospital, the general hospital that was called Laguna Honda Hospital, a very old hospital. So imagine a 24-bed open ward. This is ideal because it serves a lot of indigent people that just don't have the means to pay for other quality hospice care. It also means that they often were unaccompanied by loved ones. So this, for me and my colleagues there, we would often be present, often the only ones present for the death of many of the residents there. So on this particular occasion, I was working with Ron. We'll call him Ron. He'd been a merchant marine his life, and so he liked adventure. So I would read to him regularly, and had done so for a few weeks. And on this afternoon, I was reading him Jack London's Call of the Wild. It was an adventure story. It was just like any other afternoon, kind of sleepy, as you know, in the hospice ward. And I'm reading, and he's completely unresponsive and had been for a number of days. And as I'm reading, suddenly I find myself just above my body and above Ron's body. And I was suspended there. It wasn't like I was moving. I was just there. And I look to my right, and there's Ron. I can see his face. I can see him smiling. He's got great energy. He's alert. And he's communicating with me, and not in words, but letting me know this is where I've been. This is where I've kind of hanging out. And check it out. Isn't it cool? And I am just being receptive, a bit stunned, but not so surprised, because I'd had a couple other near-death experiences in my life, and one other shared death experience a long time ago. But this was the first time that I was really in this space, clearly, almost settled there for, I don't know how long it was. I don't think time really matters in that space, but it was pleasant. It was, there wasn't a whole lot of other phenomena. It was just really seeing Ron there and this communication that I just shared with you, that he's fine, he's well, and everything's good. And I think he was, if I were to interpret a bit, I think he kind of invited me there. I don't know how that happens, but he seemed to be welcoming to me. He wanted to show me something. And like I said, that could go a little far down the road of interpretation, but that's what it felt like for me.
So this seems like a abnormal experience. I think people in mainstream society would hear this story and think, that's really kind of odd. And yet what you have found is that it's not as odd or as abnormal as people might think it is, because there's been a lot of people who have had similar experiences. What were your beliefs about this before it happened to you? Had you heard about it before from other people? And when it happened to you, were you surprised, shocked? What was your feelings about it?
Yes. So I think it's important to get a little of my history, because when at 17 years old, I had a classic near-death experience in a skiing accident. So, had a bad fall, crushed my spine, catapulted out of my body, moved away from my body on the earth, saw, the ski area, continental North America, and then was in this beautiful, I had a satellite view of planet Earth. That's what I remember. And then a life review happening, moved towards the light, a very classic near-death experience. And I pled with that light to come back. And obviously you see that I'm here. And I had another near-death experience about 12 years later. And I had an idiopathic thrombocytopenia, which is a blood condition, a severe blood condition in which it's kind of a platelet condition where you can actually drown in your blood if you don't get treated. And in that situation, what happened was I, once again, very similar to the experience I had with Ron, what I remember is really not even remembering for a while that I was hovering. I was hovering, but I just was hovering and watching nurses in the ICU talk, hearing conversations. But I was a consciousness that wasn't even aware that I had a human body at that point, which is kind of interesting. It wasn't until the hematologist, oncologist came in late at night and tapped on my hand, which I did not feel. But I realized somehow that, he said, Mr. Peters, Mr. Peters, Mr. Peters, I'm Dr. I can say his name, and I'm here to help you. Are you awake? And I remember having this question in my mind: should I answer him? What would happen if I did answer him? Can I answer him? All these profound questions from being out of my body. I did answer him. And as I did that, I went right back into my body. And I remember energetically, like sand filling an hourglass, I could feel my energy run across my body. And I answered him, and there you are. So I share those because when I had the experience with Ron, I wasn't conscious of it at the time, but I'd already been in that space, certainly in the ICU when I had my blood imbalance. So I wasn't stunned. I knew nothing of the experience. As soon as I had the experience with Ron, I went to my supervisor, who was a veteran in hospice, had been involved and active as a leader since the AIDS epidemic we were in San Francisco. So he'd been doing hospice work for, 2 solid decades. So he knew nothing of this. I told him, hey, Eric, I just had this experience. And he kind of didn't even stop walking down this long 24-bed ward. I mean, you'd walk up and down this, and he didn't even stop. And he was a very Buddhist guy. He just said, William, phenomena rolling by, let it go. And so I did, but I would have more of these experiences while at hospice, working as a hospice volunteer. Maybe not so as profound as that kind of pop out and hover over my body and Ron's body, but other significant, seeing the light, change in the geometry of the room, if you will, kind of a warping of time and space, feeling presences, all this type of phenomena that what I would identify and the research has identified as the kind of more rudimentary, fundamental, or initial phenomena associated with the shared death experience. But like I said, I did not hear about the shared death experience, which we call the SDE, until I heard Raymond Moody talk in 2009, and he compared it to the SDE. Compared the SDE to the NDE, except that he said there's no brush with death as there is with the NDE. And these are caregiver loved ones that typically at the bedside. Now, Raymond's research was focused on people at the bedside. My research and that of my teams has found that, now we've done over 225 plus in-depth interviews. About 2/3 of them are remote. So that tells you a lot right there. So I'll stop. I hope I answered your question.
You did. So when you talk about a remote shared death experience, what you're saying is that people are not even in the same space with the person who's dying, but yet they have an experience at the same time, but they're just not in the same space.
Precisely. And so an example of one of these would be somebody, I'll take something out of my book, actually. Mark is driving, or he's in the passenger seat of a car in New Jersey. He's lying down after a difficult work weekend and kind of just resting. And all of a sudden, he feels something about his father. And he finds himself with his father in another dimension, and his father's confused. And Mark comes up with this kind of insight that, oh my gosh, my father's, he's dead. He's dead. And he's with them. And he notices his father's confused and says, Dad, I think you've died. And he goes, well, and he says, hey, I can help you. Come with me. And Mark says, the knowledge kind of arose within him, which is with a lot of our shared death experiencers in this type of SDE. We've identified a lot of different types. This one is called a type where you're assisting the dying in some way. We only have about 6% of these, but it's profound. So Mark basically orients his father, and orienting is usually always turning them towards the light and a progression towards that light, even if the light is far away. So Mark does that. He accompanies him a little bit further along the way. Beautiful realm, very much as described in the NDE, kind of heavenly, celestial, hyper alive, very vibrant, beautiful. Everyone's comfortable, sublime feelings. And then all of a sudden, Mark sees his grandmother, his father's mother, and they were very close. and his father, embraces her, and it's just, a love fest. And then Mark's uncle appears, Mark's father's brother, and they're all hugging. And Mark realizes at this point that there's a boundary here and that he'll return to Earth, his human life. And so he does. So, but and then he's back in his car. And this all happens while he's a passenger in this car. So there's a rather developed SDE, one of my favorites, but not uncommon.
That is very interesting. So you mentioned something about research. Have you been doing more research about this, or do you have a research group that's actually doing more studies about SDEs?
Yeah. So the Shared Crossing Project, which is the organization I started in 2013, is dedicated to transforming people's relationships to end of life, death and dying, through raising awareness and educating people about these extraordinary end of life experiences, which we call shared crossings. And then we bring people together in dialogue. That's our way of doing this, is that we bring people in and they share stories, and it normalizes it, and people get support. It's very healing and exciting and fun. And then people, kind of become ambassadors for this wisdom. But we also have a research arm, and the research arm has been dedicated to collecting and documenting the shared death experience. It had never been done before as a focus as we have. And in this process, and I should say, before I started this round of research, I'd already had my theories about it, because I'd had these experiences. I did a review of the literature. They are known not by the name shared death experience, but in the literature, primarily in Great Britain. The London Society for Psychical Research in the late 1800s had a great deal, many cases. Pre-death dreams and visions is what they tend to fall under, or really deathbed visions. In fact, Sir William Barrett wrote a book in 1926 called Deathbed Visions. And in that, he has 58 cases, I believe, could be off a little bit on that, of visions around the time of death that either the dying have or the caregiver loved ones have. Well, my research team, particularly Dr. Michael Kinsella and I, think that about 17 of these are shared death experiences. That means these are caregivers or loved ones at the bedside or remote, but in Barrett's case, they're typically at bedside, where they say that they shared in the journey from this life to what lies beyond, or they have phenomena related to that. So they'll see deceased relatives, or, and I should say really clearly right now, the primary feature of the shared death experience is the caregiver loved one seeing the dying in this transition, in their journey. That's the dominant motif, is journey for the dying from this life to what lies beyond, which is typically a benevolent afterlife. You can also see elevated, non-human beings. They tend to be guides or angels, called differently, beings of light. That's about 16% of our cases. And the other 13% would be seeing deceased relatives, as Mark saw in that case. So, and the research now, we just published in December of last year, which is 2021, and it was published in the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. And in that article, my primary theory, which is the different modes of participation for the experiencer, which are essentially you can be sensing an experience, sensing at a distance. Typically, that's where that is. That's kind of the more remote one. That's one mode of participation for a shared death experiencer. The second one is witnessing or observing phenomena, which are typically the phenomena I shared, the most common phenomena, which is beings, deceased beings, or other non-human beings. There's other phenomena mostly related to the near-death experience, like the light, a life review, heavenly realms, tunnels, bridges, things like that. And then there's a third type, which is accompanying. So that's when this mode of participation is the experiencer will accompany the dying along the journey. Now, Mark was doing that too, because Mark was accompanying his father along this journey into and through the afterlife in a certain way. But Mark was doing also our fourth type of mode of participation, and that is assisting. And like I said, in just 6% of these cases, that the experiencer will report that they actually assisted in the transition, helped orient them, and in some cases guide them. So this was the research that was published. And I will say that I was very pleased, as was my team, that the reviewers were, they were like so encouraging of us. Like they said, a lot of reviewers can be a little tough, but they weren't. They said, we know these experiences exist. We've heard about them. No one's ever gathered enough research to create a theory and back it up with the data. And you've done it. So we are super pleased. And I think, for those of I know most of your viewers are very familiar with hospice. I would imagine that they've either had these experiences, they've heard of them. And my hope and that of my teams is that this research will give all of us as end-of-life care providers in whatever capacity, the data, the research to say, these happen, this is what they're like, here are the features, and also this is how we can support family members or the experiencers so that they can harvest the benefits from these experiences, because they're profound. For most people, it's the most profound spiritual experience they've ever had. And they've rarely shared it. When most of our interviewees say, this is one of the first times I've shared this, maybe with a significant other, trusted somebody, but never in this amount of detail. So yeah, I hope I answered your question about the research. We're very excited about it. And we have more coming out. I should say we have another article that's been approved for publication in Omega, Journal of Death and Dying Studies.
To stay healthy as a caregiver, you need healthy self-care. Whether you're a hospice professional or a family member providing care for someone who's seriously ill, it's important to take care of yourself, mind, body, and spirit. At theheartofhospice.com, you can find self-care resources under the Learn menu. These resources will help you maintain healthy habits and find new activities to add to your self-care regimen. Caregiving is challenging. We want you to stay healthy while you do it. Check out our tips for accountability partners, self-care when you're traveling, sleep hygiene, and creative ways to feed your spirit. Your end-of-life journey matters. You are the Heart of Hospice. Now back to today's episode.
William, I have to ask, so a lot of the people the experiencers that you talked with said that they had not shared their stories, right? It was an untold experience, either because, stigma, they didn't feel like they were comfortable confiding in anybody. So when you had your experience with Ron, because that seems to be the one that was so monumental for you out of the experiences that you've had. And the first person you told was somebody who was like, it happens. This is what we do. You just keep moving through the job, basically. Did you find yourself not wanting to tell other people? Or did you say, this is life-changing for me. I want to share this story?
That is such a great question. And you're correct. I did not share it again until I heard Raymond Moody in 2009. I don't remember ever sharing it. But what's so interesting about this, Helen, is that I had a near-death experience in 1979. I had another one in 1992. I shared both of those already. I didn't talk about those either. Maybe one time I shared it with a family friend, and it was largely just dismissed. It was a non-starter. It came up because I heard someone talking about their experience on television, and I was all excited, and I went up to see a friend, a family member actually, and it just didn't go anywhere. So it just went right back in its can, if you will, within me. So what happened was, and I have to say, I'm just putting this all together as I'm talking to you right now, is that I was training as a psychotherapist in San Francisco. And one of my colleagues was doing a research paper on the near-death experience. And I said, we started talking about it. And I said, I had one of those. I had two of those actually. And I had been in the culture, I'd heard about it, but I never really pursued it or talked about it. And quite frankly, I thought that, I'd had these, but I wasn't like those people who had them. I was different. And that was an interesting thing. I wasn't like one of those near-death, rah-rah persons. I was like, well, I had it, but, it was a skiing accident. It wasn't like your typical whatever. I wasn't going to join that tribe. Didn't feel like hip to me. Felt a little too weird for me. But then as he's doing it, and by the way, my friend Jason was really a cool guy, and we started talking about it, and he was really open. Therapists were talking, and I ended up telling him I shared more there in that conversation I had in my entire life, and I was working at hospice then. So then I put the two together, and I'm like, I didn't really put them together as I'm probably putting it together now, quite frankly, but it all happened around the same time. So I know there's some connection here. But great question, because I didn't really realize that the first time I really shared this was with my colleague Jason in 2002 or something. And yes, so I am clearly in that camp of appreciating people who feel deeply hesitant about and resistant to sharing these. And I say that to all of us as hospice workers too, because we may have had these experiences, as I did, and they're profound, but we don't really hang around. We don't do much with them. I was a great experience for me, but I have to say, when I go back to it now, and when I was certainly soon after I'd had it with Jason and such, when I shared it with Jason, and certainly with Raymond Moody, the experiences don't go away. They live in our consciousness as they're more than memory. They are these energy packets that just live in us as these powerful experiences. So for me, as I'm sitting here right now, I can go back and I can remember Ron. I can see him. I can feel him. The whole space is just so available to me. Yeah. And so at the same time, I say this is affirming to hospice workers or anybody who has these, is until you actually sit with them again, you may just dismiss them as not that important. And this is the reason why I wrote the book, is that I wanted people to know how prevalent they are, how profound they are. And when you get an opportunity to share them and express them, and our interviews are typically an hour and a half, deep interviews, people are so grateful for the opportunity to have shared this experience. And it begins for many, or it certainly continues them along this deep integration of this profound kind of insight into who they are, what life is about, what death is about, connection across this veil we call death, if you will. It is really profound. And I'm not particularly interested in any specific interpretation of it. I will say that almost everybody we interview mentions that or says that they know that their deceased loved one is alive and well in a benevolent afterlife, and that they'll see them again, and that their fear of death is alleviated, and that it's changed their way of seeing themselves and the purpose of life in general, and that their grief is completely different. We know this in the research. So they're profound experiences. And, if I advocate for anything, it is that we need to bring these into our understanding of end of life and in our care programs for the loved ones. And thankfully, we have a hospice. We are the only model, as we all know, in hospice and palliative care, hospice care in particular, that really honors the experience of the family members. They're part of the unit of care. And that makes a big difference. That gives us permission, I dare say, the responsibility to inform them of these experiences and check them out to see if they've had them, so that we can help normalize them and affirm them in them. So I don't want to run too far down that track, but you see how passionate I am about this.
I think as hospice practitioners, we totally understand that. Now, I have never had a shared death experience. That's not been part of my practice as a hospice nurse, but the intensity of being present at the bedside for that moment of death, because, there's a lot of labor, as Barbara Carnes describes it, to the dying process, but that moment of death, because to me, it was always an instant where things stopped and you could feel it. And there's a stillness that's very sacred and very impactful. Those experiences are so intense. So to have a shared death experience, to be able to talk to somebody in your tribe, because I think as hospice practitioners, so you go to a party or you're sitting at a family gathering, even at a dinner with just your immediate family, we oftentimes don't share those things that we've seen during the day. I probably shared maybe 3% of the stuff that I saw at work, because either it would be interpreted as weird or macabre or sad or gruesome to people who don't work in the industry. I mean, you don't go to a party and talk about that kind of stuff. It's a total buzzkill. It's not fun. To us, it's extremely interesting, and it is a story that we carry inside ourselves. These pieces of experience that we pick up from each patient, each family. So I think to be in a tribe of people who understand, and you find out, yes, this was my experience as well, and I shared this, it is truly validating. And for someone to talk about a shared death experience, something that really, I think a lot of people would consider weird. I don't like to use the word abnormal, but it's just not one of those things that people talk about. I think people aren't as open-minded to experiences like that. 15 years ago, I would have been skeptical about something like that. But now, having worked in the industry with death and dying, folks that are experiencing that, I would hope that I would be open-minded enough to have an experience like that. That's an amazing connection to someone. And the fact that you could do that to someone you didn't even know other than as a patient when you were reading to Ron, I think that's an amazing spiritual connection that I would be privileged to be able to have.
I'm thinking now, Helen, of 2 hospice nurses who were in our study, and they talked about flybys. And it's a term that we have now integrated into our typologies. And what they talked about was, so we know this. We know that as hospice workers, especially in inpatient or outpatient, we can bond very deeply with our patients. Why? Because we come in and we are comfortable with where they are. We are open. We are often the only one in the room who's truly okay with and is affirming what they typically know is coming, whether they are able to express that or not. We can affirm their death because of that, and many other factors as well. But we do connect deeply with our patients on a relatively quick way. It can happen, especially when, in the situation that I had as a volunteer in a hospice where a lot of people were there and then have family members. So I share this because these 2 nurses I'm referring to, hospice nurses, talk about in the inpatient work they did, they would often get visited at the moment of death by a patient they'd been working with. And one of the examples and these were veterans, and one of the examples they shared, and this is in our research, happened, and you can imagine the scenario here. And I think the scenario is important. Both these nurses, both nurses talked about caring for a young man who was from the Midwest and had contracted AIDS, HIV virus. He had no one to care for him because he hadn't come out to his family and what have you. It's a scene that, is not that unfamiliar. It's less so in the modern and nowadays, but they were giving this back in the 80s or 90s. And she talked about coming home and she was meditating. And I'll say a little bit about the conditions that helped the remote SDE. She's meditating, and as she's meditating, she literally describes this individual coming by to her feeling his energy. These are very energetic experiences, which I was thinking about when you were telling your stories a moment ago, Helen, about the energy in the room. There's something about that moment of death that has a lot of high resonant quality. It's a whole nother discussion, but I think it's why so many of us find this experience of death and dying inherently meaning. There's some energetic transmission or experience that is I don't want to use the word pleasant, but it's enlivening and it's meaningful. There's so much more going on than our cognitive mind can capture. But here we are with this hospice nurse at home meditating, and this individual, this man who's just died of the HIV virus, comes by to her and basically shows her where he is. And it's a beautiful celestial realm. And he says, thank you. Thank you for caring for me. I'm fine. Goodbye. Now, the reason I say it like that is because when I'm looking for this particular type of remote SDE, it's called a flyby. I've labeled it a flyby, and it has a few functions it to me, or I should say characteristics. One is it's like this being, the dying come in quickly. They get your attention. They say, thank you, I love you, goodbye. And they're gone. And it's like, I don't know if you remember this, I share this with my team. And when I'm teaching, I say, do you remember the old Walt Disney, movies, Disney movies? Maybe they still have that fairy that comes in at the very beginning of a show, drops in, does that little blessing with the wand, and then takes off. That's what a flyby is to me. That's the image I get. Come in really quickly, smile, give a little, anointing, if you will, and then gone. So I'm not sure why I was answering that. I don't know what the original question or dialogue we were having, but I hope that was meaningful. It certainly was to me. I loved talking about that one.
No, that was awesome. That was great.
So I am curious because I think there are a lot of people out there who hear this who are still skeptical. How do you talk to people who are skeptical? What do you tell someone who shares their skepticism about the shared death experiences?
That is a great question, Jerry. I mean, first of all, I have so many people calling, reaching out, emailing to me and my project with all these experiences. And they're so grateful that they came to our website and saw the description and watched the videos that we have now. And they'll say, my experience was just like Amelia's. I can't believe it. Oh, John's was like, and that's what we'll get, So I'm just like, I don't feel particularly rankled by those skeptics. Because I may be a little smug and maybe even arrogant. I hope I don't come across that way, but I've heard so many of them. I've had so many of my experiences. I just feel like people just don't know yet. And we're just in a process where the more we get this information out, and like I say, I hope that the research and that the book's a popular book, my aspiration would be, and I will say it's my prediction, that these are going to come out of the woodwork. And very similar to the near-death experience in 1976 with Raymond Moody, here we are in 2022, and I think we're going to have a similar, it could be an avalanche. These things are, human behavior is interesting around this, but a few public figures come out, and I think we're going to normalize this pretty quick. I don't, some people ask about the physics of this. Like, how do you explain this happening? Usually the skeptics tend to be more firmly planted in the scientific materialism, the sense that the brain creates consciousness. And so if the brain is dead upon human death, then there can't be anything more. Well, this obviously challenges that model. And so did the near-death experience model. But one of the near-death experience generally. But the point being here is that these experiences in our research, keep in mind, there is no SDE out in the culture that people are trying to approximate their experience to. I mean, Raymond Moody wrote his book, Glimpses of Eternity, in 2009 or 10, but it didn't grab the culture the way I think the SDE is now gradually creeping in. And so my sense is that our stories are based on people that have no real knowledge of the SDE. They'll come to our website and they'll find us and declare, oh my gosh, I am so glad to have found you. And some people are contacting us after decades. I mean, 3 or 4 or 5 decades. We had a case with somebody who had this when lost her parent at 9 years old, and now she came to us and she's in her 70s. So like I said, these experiences are profound. They don't go away. Now, here she did have another experience as well. And when she was interviewing us, she said, as I was preparing for this, I realized I had another one as well. I just, you don't think about things very much if they're not in your cultural, social water that you swim in. The SDE is not in that water. It's not there yet. For me, it is. For my community of people that have had them, it is. And I think it's going to be increasingly so for the general public.
Well, I think as you're talking about it and as other people talk about it, it will give other people who've had those experiences the courage, if I can say it that way, to share their own experiences. They'll be willing to open up and say, well, I've had an experience like that as well. So your book is called At Heaven's Door. And I assume that the book has a lot of these stories included in the book. And then also on your website, the Shared Crossing Project, the website is just sharedcrossing.com. So on the website, there are not only the stories there, but actually the videos of people sharing their stories. And we would encourage our listeners to take advantage of your website and go and take a look at those. And would encourage them also to get a hold of the book. I assume the book is going to come out on Amazon?
It's available wherever books are sold. I mean, I'm very blessed to have Simon & Schuster as the publisher. So anywhere books are sold, you're going to be able to get it. But I always encourage people to go to their local bookstores just to help them out if they can. And if on my website, I have the sharedcrossing.com, and there's also williampeters.info. And there you can see buttons where you can choose from a series of booksellers. But the one I like is the Indie Bound, and they will find a local bookseller close to you who you can pick it up or deliver it to you.
Awesome. So, William, when does the book actually come out?
It comes out January the 18th.
January 18th. Awesome. So we would encourage our listeners to check it out, to connect with the Shared Crossing Project, connect with William, find the book, buy the book. It's really pretty captivating, the whole thing. We're going to put you on the spot now, although you knew about this question, so we'll see what you say with it. We always talk about self-care, right, as part of being professional caregivers working in end of life. But there's such an emphasis on it. We are at 2 years into the pandemic. And it's not about thriving anymore. It's about surviving through using our self-care to take care of us. So what's your current go-to healthy self-care habit? And then also we'd like to know what's your unhealthiest self-care indulgence?
Yeah, so my healthiest habit, I think, is I am a pretty committed, disciplined exerciser. Like I like swimming. I like my spin bike. I take walks as much as I can, like hiking. I have a foot injury right now. It's kind of from my ski injury. I kind of have some back and foot injuries, issues that prohibit me from doing a great deal of exercise in that way. But swimming's good, spin bike's good, and then I'm fortunate that I live near the beach here in Santa Barbara in California. So I get out and, I like to get out in the water as much as I can. I love open water swimming. Right now it's a little cold. It's wintertime, but I still go out as much as I can. I have to, I can swim in cold water, but it takes a lot more time on the flip side to warm back up. So that's what I do to take care of my self-care. And I'll tell you the habit that just frustrates me is that for whatever reason, I like looking at my cell phone and reading the news. And I don't think it's a good habit because just before I go to bed, sometimes I just go, I just want to make sure I'm up on the news. And all of a sudden I can go down the rabbit hole into like 20, 30 minutes of news. And, that's the worst time to be on any device because it does something to activate your pituitary gland and on screen time. Anyway, it's not good for self-care. But now that I've kind of outed myself, maybe I'll have a little self-shaming that will be healthy for me, a healthy shame.
No shaming, no self-care shaming here.
Okay. Well, you're not helpful then.
No, because we'd have to own up. It's it's one of those stones in the glass house.
Yes, I understand.
I don't want to shame your bad self-care because then Jerry and I would have to disclose our own bad habits.
Yeah.
We've done enough of that. That's for sure.
Confession is healthy for the soul, so that's good for you, William.
Thank you.
William, it has been such a joy to have you with us, and it really has been a privilege to hear more about the shared death experiences that you have written about and that you talk about on the Shared Crossing Project. So thank you for being our guest today, and thank you for just what you are doing to bring this out into the open and let our people, our audience, our world know more about this. I think it's going to be very interesting to see. And I want to challenge our listeners that if you have had a shared death experience, please get in touch with William through the Shared Crossing Project website, which again is just sharedcrossing.com. William, I assume that there's a link there where they can contact you. Can they reach out to you through email?
Yes. So if you just go to our contact page, there's ways to communicate right there. And the best way to get a hold of me is through info@sharedcrossing.com. That's just the best way. So yeah. And then there's also, on that contact page, there's ways that you can share your stories. We offer people different ways to share them. Some people we have a guide there to fill out an account, as we call it. But you can also just do it in whatever way you feel comfortable. You just want to write a headline for us, and then we'll go over it, and we usually get back to you, ask you a few more questions, and hopefully you can contribute to the research. And also, you might want to take a look at the spectrum of end-of-life experience, which is all these end-of-life experiences. We also track those as well. So if you're wondering, God, I don't know if I had an SDE, it was kind of like that, but it happened a little bit before the person died, go to our spectrum. We want to hear about that too.
We will have links in the show notes to all the different pages so that our listeners can connect with William and with the different ways to submit their story to the Shared Crossing Project.
William, thank you so much for being our guest today, and I look forward to having you back again sometime.
Well, Jerry and Helen, thank you so much. It's my first time being on your podcast here, and it's been fun, and you're so receptive, and I love, this is our community. So I'm so glad that you've given me the opportunity to share what I've learned with your wonderful community.
So tell me what you think, Helen. Do you think that someday you might actually have a shared death experience like this?
I would love to have that opportunity. I would love to think that I'm open-minded enough to do it. As a nurse, I think I've always been very focused on the clinical, on the science part of it. William said that, people who are focused on the science. I would hope that I would be open-minded enough to not miss out on that opportunity if it was in front of me. What about you? Maybe, have you had an experience like that as a chaplain? You've been at numerous bedsides.
I have been, but I never have had an experience like that. And I will have to say that mine is not about science, but more about religion. I think religion has a tendency to push those things aside. And I was really intrigued by one of the things that he said, and I don't know that it was in the interview or if it was in some of our conversation after the interview, But he said that many of the people that he talked to, who had shared with him about their experiences, said that they were now more spiritual than religious, that they had been religious, that they had been a part of a faith community, but that now they found themselves to be more defined as spiritual, not religious.
Right. Not that their religion wasn't still important to them, but it became a smaller component of their spiritual life.
Right. Exactly. And I think most religious people are going to be skeptical about experiences like this.
Well, I have to say that, 15 years ago, I would have said, it's a bunch of quacks, bunch of cuckoo people. Like William was saying, there are people that think that about him. But working in hospice, I think because I had so much interaction and collaboration with spiritual care clinicians, which is what a chaplain is, right? A chaplain is a spiritual counselor, a spiritual care clinician. I think I got more comfortable with my own spirituality, not the religion part of it. I do subscribe to a particular religion, but it is one component of my spiritual life. And I think working around chaplains, all you soul jockeys, sky pilots, I got a lot more comfortable with it. I mean, these are people that you have these conversations with, and you have conversations about death and dying, and nobody gets grossed out or leaves the room because they're all having the same experiences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We all have this community that we share because we have the same shared experiences.
Right.
So one of the things that is common within hospice that's very similar to this is that we recognize the patient will have an experience where they are still alive, still living, breathing, but they are seeing things that are not in the room. They're seeing
Right.
people who are not in the room. And they talk about, seeing their parents or this uncle or this aunt or maybe even a child that died before they did.
Right. A sibling.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Those experiences are very common. And people in hospice talk about those things that happened just before a person died.
Yeah. I've heard people describe it, as hallucinations, but then I've heard other explanations for it. As the physical body shuts itself down, you also have the mental and the spiritual component of a person, of a human. And the spiritual part, the spirit of a person, is beginning to move into other spaces, much the way William described, while the physical body is still shutting itself down, shutting itself off, and shutting those systems off. So the spirit is in a different realm, different plane, and so is open and available and seeing these other things that in the, what did William call it? The benevolent afterlife.
Yes.
Whatever the afterlife might look like, because I have heard patients talk about that. I remember having one patient that talked about swinging on a swing with his little sister. And the patient's daughter told me his sister had been dead for years. But when they were kids, they lived on a farm and they had a swing. And that was one of the things they did as children to play, was they would go outside and swing on a swing set. And it was a very vivid image for him while he was moving through the dying process. His spirit was connecting with his sister. It was very real. And it had a lot of meaning for that daughter. It was a shared death experience, but for her to know that her father was moving to a place that connected him with people and memories that were very dear to him.
So this has been so interesting. And we would like to ask of you, our listeners, that if you do decide to share one of your shared death experiences with William and his group of researchers, that you let them know that you heard about this on the Heart of Hospice podcast, because we would like to know that you heard this and that you shared this with them. So if you have a shared death experience and you're willing to let them know about it and and tell them your story. So please get in touch with William and let him know that you would like to share your story.
Yes. So the website to connect with William and the team at Shared Crossing Project is sharedcrossing.com. You can also go to, and Jerry, correct me if I haven't got this right, williampeters.info, and that will take you to his profile. You can connect with the book there. You can purchase the book. You can pre-order it now, Barnes & Noble, Audible, Amazon, IndieBound, and Apple Books, along with Bookshop. You can get the book at several different places. It comes in paperback and hardback as well. Just an interesting topic. And we hope that if you're a hospice practitioner and you have not had a shared death experience, I would encourage you to go on the Shared Crossing Project website, watch the videos, read the stories to gain an understanding and an insight into these experiences that your colleagues might have had, that your patients or their family members might have, because this is what I know about something like this. I have never seen Mount Everest, but I know it's there. And I've heard people talk about their experiences and their adventures climbing it. Just because I haven't seen it or done it myself doesn't mean I don't believe those people's stories. I would encourage hospice clinicians, practitioners to go into the website and sort of wade into this. Have a look at it, listen to the videos, and definitely read the stories. I think it's a valuable tool and valuable information to have in your experience as a hospice practitioner.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of Hospice. I'm Jerry Fenter here with Helen Bauer. Because we know your hospice journey is 24/7, you can always find us at theheartofhospice.com. Subscribe to the podcast, please, wherever you're listening, and leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts.
To connect with us, just send an email to host@theheartofhospice.com. You can also find us on social media. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.